She called her mum, the same woman whose image had been framed on the wall of her childhood bedroom, whose wedding photo used to hang above the bed where Tiffany whispered her prayers and imagined a love like hers. Only now that picture was a relic of what had been stolen, a shattered memory scattered across the carpet like the splinters of trust that had been ground to dust beneath the heels of betrayal. Tiffany Mann stood before the world not as some manufactured scandal queen, but as a daughter whose entire spiritual foundation had been detonated in a heartbeat, and that explosion was not fueled by gossip or ambition, but by truth, raw, unsparing, and roaring out of her chest in a voice that had been tempered by years of silence she had been taught to swallow. The moment she said, "I caught them, my father and Dr. Jackie together in that hotel room," it landed with the sonic force of an earthquake beneath a cathedral. Every hymn, every sermon, every carefully curated facade of the Mann family legacy cracked like glass under pressure, and something that had been held as sacred for decades split open and hemorrhaged the consequences of a secret no one dared speak aloud until she did. There was no rehearsal for this. There was no script. She hadn't come to Dallas to weaponize pain. She had come to find family, to surprise her father with warmth ahead of a brunch that was supposed to be about healing and presence. And instead, she walked into a locked, immaculate room 924 at the Fairmont. Sheets expensive enough to scream opulence, the air still heavy with the scent of someone else's breath, and in that stillness saw the unthinkable. Dr. Jackie, the woman who had sat beside her mother in hospital beds, whispered scripture into their ears, braided her hair before prom, called herself Mama J, half-dressed in a stumble between intimacy and evasion, and David Mann bare-chested and silent, both frozen like apparitions caught mid-sin, staring at Tiffany as though ghosts had materialized where only daughters should have stood. The wound opened then. The scream she let out was not from her throat, but from that place where childhood trust and solemn vows live. A scream that trembled through hallways, past the oblivious luxury of the lobby staff, into the cold air outside as she ran, not toward revenge, but toward visibility, toward witness. She didn't call a PR team. She didn't dial for advice. She went live. Her face was taut with grief, her hands trembling not from performance, but from the physics of betrayal, and she said, loud enough that millions could hear, "I caught my father and the woman I trusted most in a hotel room together like lovers." And for once, the gospel world couldn't look away, because transparency had finally been forced into the spotlight by the only thing that could break through layers of sanctified silence, a daughter who refused to be gaslit into complicity. Within minutes, the view count skyrocketed. Tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, then a digital mob of witnesses flooding comments, sharing, replaying, questioning, and beneath them the ripple slams of consequence began. Tamela Mann, already battling fatigue and heart complications, heard the clip and collapsed. The hurt of a daughter's confession hitting her like a spiritual hemorrhage, her body betrayed by the weight of truth as her own world that had once seemed unshakable trembled. They sedated her, not to silence the pain, but to stabilize a body that could not process the rupture of love being used as a pawn in deception. Tiffany, eyes raw, voice cracked but unbroken, didn't soften the words. The woman who had once knelt to pray over her in public had been privately orchestrating her family's unraveling, replacing her mother's place piece by piece, first in ministry, then in marriage, then in the space where daughters once believed unconditional trust resided. "You took my mom's place," she said, and that wasn't only about marital betrayal. It was about spiritual theft, the swapping of the sacred with the sinister by someone who had slid into their lives under the guise of healing. David didn't deny it. He didn't offer explanation. He blamed her. "I was grown enough to understand," he said, the arrogance of a man who believed his age and influence insulated him from accountability, as if the destruction of his daughter's world was some consequence she'd chosen rather than a trauma inflicted by those who were meant to protect. The moment Tiffany smashed the framed picture of her parents' wedding on camera, no cinematic score, no editing, just the visceral sound of glass fracturing and her walking away, the world stopped pretending. That image, that act, wasn't a breakdown. It was a declaration. She had prayed for a love like her parents. She had believed in the spiritual family that surrounded them. And now the altar of all those prayers was burning, and the smoke had wounds etched into it. From the moment the live dropped, darkness. Tiffany, always quick, countered with a second video, this time from her mother's hospital room. Tamela awake enough to whisper the truth, with eyes that had lost their brightness, but not their clarity. "I saw the signs," Tamela breathed, the betrayal slicing deeper because she had believed family, had welcomed Jackie into their fold, had let her in to pray over her body while the same hands were rearranging the rules of their legacy. Legal teams issued cease and desist notices for unauthorized use of Tamela's name and launched defamation counters, while the community watched one of its own topple from grace, not by scandal alone, but by cumulative exposure of what had been packaged as ministry and wielded as power. Influential voices severed ties in real time. Bishop T.D. Jakes called off appearances, Kirk Franklin unfollowed publicly, major gospel awards wiped Jackie from upcoming lists, and, more painfully, David Mann's own son, David Jr. "I posted, I told you all years ago," giving voice to an internal fracture that had been dismissed as family drama for too long. The internet polarized, fans choosing sides like soldiers in a civil war. Some shared stories of daughters betrayed by mentors, others clung to the narrative that Jackie was a griever, painting Tiffany as aggressive and ungrateful, but the weight of leaked evidence, video, audio, documents, began to drown out the defenders. At the heart of it all was the real, continuing question: how much of this had been strategic? Sources whispered that David and Jackie had traveled under the radar for years, attending church retreats together, holding private dinners under aliases, building a network of access and influence while simultaneously constructing a private world where Tamela's voice grew fainter and the replacing figure grew louder. The gospel legend, the woman who once was the face of spiritual healing, now stood accused of crafting her own ascendancy on the ruins of another woman's body, of legitimizing a takeover while using the language of care and prayer to mask moving pieces of a mosaic only she could see. As the week closed, the world had split. Those still in denial clung to fragments of her former image. "Maybe it was a misunderstanding," they murmured, while the believers in the exposé kept posting, kept sharing, kept demanding accountability. Tiffany, now the de facto architect of the narrative, refused to let the story die. She set her sights not just on public redemption for her mother and herself, but on dismantling the ecosystem that allowed such betrayal to be cloaked in holiness, exposing the board members who had looked the other way, naming the pastors who still preached unity in private while quietly distancing themselves in public, rallying daughters who had been silenced to speak, and promising that what she had detonated would not be a temporary headline, but a sustained reckoning. She exposed the spiritual fraud, the emotional abuse, and the mechanism by which sacred trust had been manipulated into a weapon. This wasn't merely about a father and a replacement or a mentor who had overstepped. It was about the industry of perceived righteousness that had let wolves wear cassocks and sit at the table of the pure, harvesting credibility while seeding ruin. The storm, Tiffany declared, was far from over, because beyond the public shaming, beyond the legal entanglements, beyond the fractured family, there were more layers. The husband of Dr. Jackie, who had been silent until now, poised on the brink of revelation. The board members quietly drafting responses. The allies of old guarding their own reputations while the internet dug. And the daughters of gospel families who were watching, learning, and deciding whether to speak or forever hold their peace. The story had started with a live confession, a daughter's anguish made visible, but it had metastasized into warfare, spiritual, emotional, legal, cultural, and in the center of it all stood Tiffany Mann, no longer just a daughter in pain, but a catalyst for truth, a witness demanding justice, and a voice refusing to let the betrayal be repackaged as something less than what it was, a calculated replacement, a strategic takeover, a spiritual coup dressed as compassion. The legacy that had once been considered untouchable now lay in pieces, and every shard reflected not just a single lie, but the many lies it had been built upon. This was the beginning of the end of what had been unquestioned and the dawning of whatever came next, for Tamela, for Tiffany, and for the entire gospel world that had believed in a purity that, beneath the surface, had rotted from the inside. swallowed church pulpits, emptied pews, and echoed through gospel radio stations that suddenly stopped spinning. Take me to the King. Tiffany Mann had gone dark after the live stream. Her social media wiped clean like a battlefield after war. But the internet was on fire. Screenshots of the hotel receipt with David Mann's signature on the check-in form alongside Dr. Jackie's ID, leaked by a whistleblower claiming to be a front desk clerk at the New Orleans Marriott, went viral. Another image, pixelated but unmistakable, showed a half-naked David standing behind Dr. Jackie, her hand clutching a wine glass, his wedding ring visibly absent. And the most damning part, the timestamp. One day before Easter Sunday, a service where David preached about redemption while holding Tamela's hand in front of a congregation that had no idea their salvation anthem had been written in the shadow of betrayal. But this wasn't just about a man cheating on his wife. This was about who he cheated with. Dr. Jackie wasn't just a random woman. She was the family's spiritual midwife. She baptized Tiffany at 7. She blessed Tamela and David's vow renewal in 2019. She was the woman Tiffany had once called Aunt Jackie, the same woman who'd counseled her through her eating disorder, her panic attacks, her trust issues, and now the same woman who lay in the bed of her father while her mother sang worship songs backstage. And when the lawyers started talking, it got worse. A sealed custody document from 1999 resurfaced, a document that revealed Dr. Jackie had once filed for guardianship of Tiffany Mann when Tamela had been hospitalized for postpartum depression. That revelation cracked open a new conspiracy. Had Jackie always seen Tiffany as her spiritual heir, even if it meant tearing her from her real mother? Court records showed Jackie had attempted to adopt Tiffany but was blocked by Tamela's recovery. Now that same woman was in bed with Tiffany's father, and the internet was starting to wonder, had this been grooming disguised as mentorship? Meanwhile, Tamela was silent. Her team denied divorce rumors, but she hadn't posted in 11 days. Gospel radio hosts speculated about her health. A blurred image of her in sunglasses entering a clinic in Dallas sparked rumors of a mental breakdown. Kirk Franklin unfollowed David. Tasha Cobbs posted a cryptic tweet. God's sheep ain't stupid. Wolves in robes get exposed. And when Sunday service rolled around, no one from the Mann family showed up to the Light Church. The choir stood silent. The camera streamed a pre-recorded sermon from 2022. Donations dropped 42% in a week. And then came Tiffany's return. Not with a live stream this time, but with a podcast. A 14-minute episode titled The Fire I Was Born In. Her voice was slow, deliberate, every word soaked in pain but sharp with precision. I was born to a woman who taught me to sing before I could walk, and a man who taught me how to pretend, she said. I thought I was angry at my father for cheating. But what I'm really angry about is the silence, the lies, the church folk who knew and said nothing, the women who saw the text messages and chose sisterhood over truth. I'm not just breaking generational curses, I'm burning altars. By minute 7, she revealed something even darker. I've been carrying this for years, she whispered, voice trembling. At 16, I found a note in my dad's desk drawer. It was from Dr. Jackie. It said, I'll raise her better than Tamela ever could. I didn't understand what it meant then. I do now. The podcast ended with sobbing. No outro music, no sponsors. Just the sound of a woman grieving the funeral of a family that was still breathing. The backlash was immediate. David's tour with Tyler Perry was quietly cancelled. One by one, venues pulled out. Dr. Jackie's Women of Glory conference lost its venue in Atlanta. She released a 5-sentence statement. I have loved the Mann family for decades. Mistakes were made, hearts were broken, but God is still sovereign. The comments? Brutal. So you ruin a home and say God's in control? Sovereignty ain't a get-out-of-scandal-free card. You're not a prophet, you're a predator. Meanwhile, fans demanded answers from Tamela. On day 14, she finally posted. A black screen, white text, no caption, just 5 words. Don't ask me, ask God. Gospel blogs dissected the statement like scripture. Was she angry at Tiffany? Was she shielding David? Or was she planning her own revenge? But then came the legal bombshell. Tiffany filed a lawsuit, not just against Dr. Jackie, but against the church. The same church that let Jackie counsel her, house her, even sign off on medical decisions as a minor during a 2004 mission trip.